My name is Corey Wells. I'm the manager of sustainability at Lotusland, Ganawalska Lotusland Botanic Garden. Basically, the idea of a manager of sustainability has gotten pretty broad, but it's having that intimate understanding about nature and that connection and growing all these plants using that information.
Tell me, were you here when Narciso Torres visited, and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be asked to tour with Narciso, and he was an interesting guy. I almost knew before he even arrived what he might have in mind, because I had heard he was this amazing rainforest gardener and farmer and doing this regenerative, like natural gardening. And I've seen other documentaries on that, and I knew we'd be kindred spirits right away. He had an intimacy that was incredible, and he was very, very kind person, and it was very important for him to make a connection with you. And I took that very personally, because I thought that's such a lost art, I think, to connect with people before you try to impart too much information on them. And he's very kind in that way.
You were saying something about you need to be sensitive to the environment. What were you saying?
Well, I thought we would both have that in common, and I knew, we did.
I'm sorry, and they won't hear my voice. What did you both have in common?
Oh, Narciso and I both had this, both have an intimate understanding of nature. It's the basis of our whole systems that we operate from. His understanding of the forest is second to none. And I don't think he really looks at the forest as something just to take from. I think the forest gives him what he needs. Just like on this land, I monitor to see insect activity, bird activity, and I see what's here. And I want to support that and possibly add to that. But it's not necessarily what I'm taking away. It's what I'm supporting and encouraging. And that's an understanding that's critical to success if you're going to work with the natural world.
What was his interest when he was here?
We did a tour of all the gardens, and he was inspired by the trees, I think. I think he loved our flowers. Things were very different probably from the rainforests of Belize. But he was very excited. I think he just loved all the plants. We have very unusual plantings here, and they're done very artistically. And I think he was a little bit surprised at what he was seeing. It is a very special garden. But I think he felt right at home when he heard the birds and saw the insects, just teeming through the flowers. And I think that really probably made him feel at home, because he knows that's a good sign.
Did he ask you any questions that you recall?
Not particularly about the plants. It seemed more he was focused on us forming a friendship. So, and as he learned and saw what he was, for the first time, he was seeing all these new plantings and this creative displays. I think he was really still focused on, in a lot of ways, on being friends and connecting as humans, and sharing our intention to support each other and to support our natural environments.
What would you say is the importance of regenerative agriculture to people throughout the world?
I would say it's our future. I'd say it's critical to guaranteeing we have a food supply. The old models are becoming exploited to the point where we're going to start seeing worse problems in those areas. Shortages, and just too simplified of a diet, basically, too. The diversification of food sources is just lost. To secure the food source, you don't want to have everything growing in one place and shipping it all over the world. You want to support diversity in your crops. You want to support local communities. And in that way, you guarantee a food supply forever.
What's the importance of diversity of food supplies, that if one goes, you have another? Explain again.
Yeah, the importance of diversity in regenerative ag, say, is you're supporting local communities, but you're also safeguarding our national food supply. So by having it diversified among many crops, many areas, done by locals, and supporting their local communities with food, not necessarily shipping everything across the ocean and then taking their food and shipping it here. You safeguard from problems that can wipe out big monocultures like corn, wheat, soy. Those are very vulnerable. One pest can run through an entire crop and change the price of that commodity worldwide. When you have diversity, you completely erase that threat because one pest isn't going to like all different crops or one disease. And so that's why it's so critical to safeguard our food supply. We've already seen big problems in that. And when you see communities that have diversified, locally supported, regenerative ag, they're thriving, they're happy, and they have just an incredible community connection there. It's a much better place to live usually.
Some people would say that the monoculture, mono-farming it makes food inexpensive, and that you can't use regenerative and sustainable methods to have food inexpensive. Do you have any thoughts about that?
That's an interesting question. So it's the idea that it's too expensive to do things organically or regeneratively. That's probably the biggest campaign against it, and it's probably the biggest misunderstanding. They told me that when we started this program here at Lotusland. This is a regenerative program. And they said it will be too expensive, it's impossible to do. The truth is, the losses were so big by not doing it to the environment, to our topsoils, to climate change, to a number of other problems. The pollution of every creek across the coast, which has happened. These are incredibly huge costs. So regenerative ag on the backside, after the big effort is put in to establish it, the benefits are huge. Clean water, a stable food supply, support for ecology. We're seeing the demise of pollinators across the whole nation. These problems are going to get worse, and what happens is you become even more dependent on the Mediterranean honeybee, which now is stressed to the breaking point. We now know that there are many native insects that can help with pollination if the proper habitat is restored. That's one of our cornerstones of our educational program here.
Well put. So it's not just the cost that you pay for the individual piece of food, it's all the cost of everything else.
It's not just the cost of an individual piece of food you buy at the store. There are huge negative costs with the massive monoculture, as you put it, or the conventionally grown crop. There are huge negative costs that we don't see. There are satellite images showing topsoil runoff 4 miles out in the ocean off of places like Madagascar where they haven't done enough regenerative ag. Satellite images that are startling. People don't realize that. Topsoil has been eroded on a massive scale, but no one really cares unless you're aware of these things. Regenerative ag, on the other hand, doesn't have erosion. It prevents all erosion by supporting soil biology and ecology right up the food chain. So you stabilize.
Well, 1 second.
Okay.
I'm just going to get a slightly different shot. Let's see here. You were saying?
Regenerative ag literally stabilizes the land so it can't run off or can't blow away in the wind. That's one of the main differences. It also sequesters a huge amount of carbon, tons per acre. It also can digest the pollutants that are constantly being pumped into the environment from industry. It literally can take toxic substances and render them harmless. When you have a sterile environment, that doesn't happen.
How does that work?
Bioremediation is a huge part of our future because we have so many toxic lands, and that involves microscopic organisms in the soil being used to render toxic things like oil that's all over the land, and it can actually convert those through biological activity into safe environments for us. We are dependent on keeping soil biology alive and actually augmenting that where we have real big problems. It's the only true solution to many of the biggest issues like sewage and other problems. And you can create beautiful ecosystems right next to sewer plants because they'll benefit from the cleaning process. So there's amazing models out there.
Is it like filtering the pollutants out and transforming them?
Basically, bioremediation involves, it's a filtering process partially, but as pollutants to water filter through gravels that are alive in the bottoms of ponds, and moving along streams, organisms on the gravel, in the soil, in the waterway, if they're the right ones, can actually slowly filter these pollutants out and save our estuaries, which are a critical habitat for the ocean and for the fish to be born in.
Adjust the shot again. Is a garden similar to a farm? Are there similar principles, even though you may be growing different things here than a farm would?
Is a garden like Lotusland similar to a farm? Well, it's similar to a regenerative farm. That's what it's similar to. This model has a huge overlap with regenerative ag. I can't tell you, it's really the same thing. We even have crops here. We do have citrus, and I've grown huge pumpkins, and we actually are growing more this year with great success. So we do many of the same things. We are using composting systems. All the green waste is literally composted and brought back to the garden in a closed loop. It used to go to landfills. That wasn't very long ago. So that's one program. On regenerative ag, you increase insect activity for beneficial insect activity. So here we do the same thing. They used organic fertilizers if they need fertilizers. We use organic fertilizers here. They use cover crops that can help feed plants kind of indirectly. As crops are grown, they can be turned into the soil, and then the next crop can benefit from that in that farm pasture. We do the same thing here. We have cover crops. So there's many, many things that are exactly the same. And so we actually have regenerative agricultural speakers speak at our symposium. Some of those people have the largest companies in the world, and they're doing exactly what we're doing at Lotusland because it's just simple environmental support while you're trying to grow plants. Farm tries to grow plants, Lotusland tries to grow plants. It's one planet, plants are plants. Knowing how to grow those in a safe and environmentally supportive way, not using chemicals, is critical. And we're both doing that. So it's very similar to regenerative farming.
You mentioned earlier some of the principles of Lotusland. Are there a set of principles you can tell me?
Well, on the ground, there really are. There's a set of principles that we have to keep that are programs, basically. Like I mentioned, the composting program, critical. A garden this size, 40 acres, is going to produce a huge amount of green waste. What are you going to do with that? You have to figure out how to process that back into compost. It's not that hard. So once you knock that out of the way, the next cornerstone is going to be insect activity. You have to have a thriving insect ecology. It's not that hard. You bring in habitat using native plants, native annuals like beautiful lupins and poppies, and chaparral for this area, which is exactly what would grow up in our foothills here. And now you've covered that biological aspect, the beneficial insects. That's the second cornerstone of this whole thing.
And with that, you get seeds or seedlings and you plant them here, right? To encourage the...
Every year we regenerate our habitat plantings. So we use annual seed that we broadcast. Many plants reseed, so many areas you don't even have to seed again. We also plant small native species of plants in hedgerows throughout the property, so they're strategically placed. That way, no matter which way the wind's blowing, we always have beneficial insects moving in and out of the garden. And it's to the point now where we no longer have any pests. That's a big thing to accomplish. We used to have every pest there was known to ornamental horticulture. Now we have 0 pests. And that wasn't very hard to do. In fact, you almost want to keep a few pests because that feeds the beneficial insects. We have a hard time keeping a few pests even. We have very little disease in the soil. We used to have every disease. So we saw these huge improvements, establishing this, bringing back the compost, the organic matter program, bringing back the insects. In that program, not using chemicals is another cornerstone. It's something you're not doing versus something you are doing. But you are doing it, you're just not putting out pesticides. Insecticides, massive amounts of toxic herbicides. We stopped all of that. And then we also use mild fertilizers like ocean kelp and fish from fish industries.
Interesting.
These are simple, locally supported too.
So these are the principles.
These are the principles. They're actual programs. They're principles and they're programs. Each principle has a program associated with it, and that program is monitored very carefully. Everything is on Excel spreadsheets on a very well-calculated schedule. So we don't go back. We continue to polish this ecologically driven garden year after year, decade after decade. And at this point, I think we've actually built programs like this at over half a dozen major gardens across America, and we've influenced hundreds. I've spoken at the national conference and at the state level, at the county level, and I've helped educate the local cities around us on being part of their committees. And it's very popular because it works. I let the results speak for themselves.
Definitely. Let's see what else is on my list. Do you have any? Well, actually, one thing I was going to ask is, you seem to appreciate all living things, not just people, but animals, bugs, and plants. And Narciso seems to be that way too. Can you compare yourself or have any thoughts about that?
The Narciso from Belize rainforest has an intimate connection with nature. That goes without saying. He appreciates and understands his life depends on appreciating all nature. I have the exact same principle here, along with our composting and whatnot. You have to have an intense appreciation for all of nature. So you appreciate the ones you can't even see, like the soil microbes. You appreciate the beautiful butterflies and the native bee species and all the diversity. That's really important. It's getting a little more obvious then. As you move up the food chain, we actually have wild animals that come through at night. We have coyote and foxes, and we have raccoons and skunks. All these native animals need a place to live. And as it turns out, if you appreciate even the larger animals, they don't bother anybody. If you don't trap them or disturb them too much, they form habitats and pecking orders. And at this point now, we don't have any more problems with any of those animals. And before, when they were pushed out, we had terrible problems with them because you displaced them from their homes and their territories. So you just disrupted their whole system. Now, we live in harmony with bobcats on the property, coyotes and fox families, and raccoons, skunks, even the non-native opossum. They don't do too much damage, but they're not a native. People think they're a native. We've even had the largest is a mountain lion come through. Didn't bother anyone, and it was moving back up into the mountains. So we're prepared for this, and it actually benefits us, our garden, the community, to learn about these animals and not be afraid of them. They don't want to hurt us, but we just need to make sure that when they get to our sanctuary gardens, that they're not harassed, and they're probably going to come at night anyway. But education for that is extremely important. People have a lot of unusual ideas, a lot of misinformation about these animals, and they're often afraid of them. There's very few animals you would ever need to be afraid of in California to begin with. And a re-education of that needs to happen soon because I'm aware of the most incredible wise tales all the time that I'm confronted with, and it's kind of sad. We need to re-educate our children, which is exactly what we're doing here. Our 4th grade outreach is booming, and the kids get an early scientific education on ecology, growing plants using ecology, not just buying plants, but realizing it's an entire environment they're creating for their plant with butterflies and birds involved. And so they learn that there's more to it than just a simple desire for a certain plant.
The animals, are they beneficial in some ways, like keeping down rodents or other things like that?
All of the wild animals that visit this garden at night, including the bobcat, the coyote, all the way down to the microbe, have relationships with this land. These are predator-prey relationships. When we have too many rodents, we see a rise in foxes, bobcats, and sometimes we see them in the daytime hunting. There's plenty of food for them. As they eat that food, then we see them move off and go and find another spot to eat. So there is an intense balance to ecology here. And that's really the most important thing to take away, I think. It doesn't take long. I can do this in 1 year at a garden if they really want to put all the right pieces together. It took us a long time because we were feeling in the dark. There were no advisors back then. It was all conventional ag. But now we realize that we've hit ecological balance, or as close to it as you can. We actually turn up the volume a little bit on insects because we need a little bit more since we have so many ornamental plants. But it's as close as you're going to get to an ideal ecological balance in a garden. So all the animals play a role in that. That's why you don't want to harass things. You want to keep supporting, and they'll balance, whether it's soil microbes or larger rodents and things, rabbits, they will hit the balance. It just happens that we've done that for the last 15 years. We've been in balance.
When did things change from traditional to more sustainable? And what brought about the change?
The big change for Lotusland happened about 30 years ago. I started about 33 years ago. At that point, it needed a change. We were experiencing a drought. We had tremendous stresses on the garden. And those stresses are really just a test. So as we moved into regenerative horticulture, you might call it now, like regenerative ag, it's really the new term. It's regenerative horticulture. We had some successes, and then we had more, and we had more, and then it steamrolled until we hit ecological balance relatively quickly, not having really the advisors. But as we hired the professors that were studying biology, then we got the good advice, and everything came into balance, even from our educational standpoint, from our advisors. So that was probably about, so the program started 30 years ago, but we've been enjoying the balance for over a decade now.
And it didn't change just here. Throughout the country, I guess, permaculture, sustainable ag became something more common. Are you familiar with that? Or
other programs across the country, like permaculture and regenerative ag, they are making headway. They're very popular in coastal areas often, and certain outposts across the nation. But conventional ag still represents the majority of all growing of plants, basically. So botanic gardens are extremely popular, and they're an ideal opportunity to promote ecological balance. But I don't want to delude myself in thinking that that's the dominant way of thinking. Most of the country is, like 94% is, excuse me. Those are calls.
So why doesn't conventional ag change over to regenerative?
Conventional ag would change to regenerative ag overnight if they found a monetary benefit to it. But we live in one of the most wonderful countries in the world with huge areas that can be farmed. Huge. And now that we can move water from north to south, the southern half of the continent, basically, of America, has some of the most fertile soils. So the conventional model, before it destroys the soil, can take full advantage of the water movement to farm new lands that haven't been destroyed yet. Once they're collapsed, that's when they often turn to regenerative ag. Or they grow a lower quality crop that can still make money when it goes to market. So it's really crops have become a commodity shipped all over the world. They're not necessarily just for food for us.
The monoculture farming is more concerned with maximizing profit rather than looking to the future, maximizing short-term profit, I should say. Is that right?
The monoculture model continues to dominate because it maximizes profits at all cost. If they have to get new land, they'll get new land. Large areas of Africa are being bought up by China and other countries too, because it's a huge continent. When you have profits as your driving force, the last thing you want to do is put in an entirely new model, unless it can be proven to be successful. We are seeing some good inroads. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the largest berry producers in the world, or the largest berry producer, uses regenerative ag, and they control a large percentage of the organic market. The organic market is very lucrative. As it grows, we will see inroads, and hopefully there will be an epiphany or a jump where conventional ag has so many problems with that model from a biological standpoint, with pests and diseases that they can't solve because they've run that model to exhaustion, and the pests are so virulent you can't find chemicals that will kill them. That's when they're going to come running for regenerative ag, because that can solve some of the worst problems they're experiencing, pests and disease. That's really what regenerative ag does. A healthy ecosystem can save diseased soil. We proved it here, and they proved it in big ag too, just a small part of big ag. They're starting to get interested, but we need to keep pushing, not in a forceful way. We need to push in a way that educates and shows them this is lucrative, and it supports tourism, the communities, all sorts of jobs that are permanent jobs with good lives. These are good jobs. Once they see people flock to those, when those companies start to switch over and people flock to those for meaningful work that's not toxic to their own health, I think regenerative ag will start to move over, and you'll see benefits you can't possibly see now. Like, we enjoy benefits now that we couldn't imagine before. We thought that it was impossible, but we knew we had to try something new because it was collapsing around us, the old model. So once we made the jump, we saw benefits that we couldn't have imagined. And that's what I really want people to understand. You must have that intimate appreciation for nature, and you will have benefits you can't picture now, because there's so many and they come in such unusual ways. They problem solve themselves. So you become not just a maintenance person, you become more of an ecological gardener. And it's a much more fulfilling job, career, lifestyle, than just doing the same simple job over and over.
Well, what does an ecological gardener mean?
An ecological gardener doesn't just buy a plant and stick it in the ground. An ecological gardener knows everything about that plant before he even buys it. Then he looks at the land to see, will that plant fit in that land? Will it have problems based on experience and the needs of that plant? Will there be the insects there to support it? Has that land been compacted and damaged? Does it need to be repaired a bit, prepared for the introduction of this wonderful plant that they've purchased? So there's an intimacy there that's often lost when you look at the breakneck speed of contracting and construction. Usually things have to be repaired by whoever inherits these properties, and things have to be replanted over and over.
Who is the berry company that is so successful that you mentioned?
Driscoll's
Driscoll.
is the champion.
Huh. Where are they based, do you know?
Driscoll's is on 5 continents. They're worldwide.
Oh, okay.
One operation here on our coast has 6,000 employees.
Really?
Yeah.
I should
And
maybe check it out.
yeah, Driscoll's is one of the biggest.
Where's the 6,000 employees?
That's in San Quintin, Baja.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've flown there. They flew me there because they wanted me to see their laboratories. They have biological laboratories where they source native strains of biology and grow those in bioreactors. These individual strains of beneficial fungi, in this case, can be used to prevent disease in what was conventional fields, but now can support organic produce, organic berries.
Shot again. What would you say is the value of indigenous knowledge?
Indigenous knowledge, it's hard to speak to that because there are so many values. I'm not even an expert on it, but I know from what little I do know is that they were the first and probably the best at living in harmony with nature. Many tribes I know, or nations, to put it more accurately, were nomadic. So as resources were utilized in one area and started to drop a bit, they knew to move along, let things recover. When I use ocean kelps for feeding the garden, which is one of the best foods you can possibly imagine, using sea kelps that are dried and micronized, it's kind of like the indigenous people in a way. Those intertidal zones where the kelp is harvested are allowed to rest for 8 years before they harvest again. That allows for regeneration. So regeneration, when you're using the environment for life support, indigenous people knew that. So they would often move, or if they settled in a place, they learned how to live in harmony in that area. They knew not to exploit and destroy their environment. And so there's a lot of lessons there, a lot of lessons. When I walk around the garden, if I hear a bird call, it means something. It can tell you where a bobcat is crouched in the grass. Most people have lost those senses. Indigenous people, they know this. They know these things. They know exactly what the bird calls, or if a red-tailed hawk soaring above gives out a screech, it can mean something. So you start to appreciate everything you hear, everything you smell, everything you taste. It's very much based on our senses, which brings you into the present moment. Most of the time we spend in our heads, in the future or the past. But they were very present, especially when they needed to be. They knew to be hyper present at the right time.
And so the master forest gardener, Narciso Torres, he definitely brings important indigenous knowledge as well as other indigenous people, right?
Narciso Torres embodies presence. He has an amazing intimacy with the environment that is hard to even speak to. We can learn a lot from people like that because the way they carry themselves, the presence they have with hearing and smelling the forest and seeing it shows an awareness that's cycles. Lotusland is on a cycle of the way this land grows, whether we want to be or not. This was an oak woodland for miles in every direction, one solid canopy. This is actually a small fracture in that canopy. So we were fortunate enough to inherit this property from the late Madam Ganowalska, and we're stewards of the land now. But we never forget that this oak woodland wants to close back up. So we're constantly limiting the woodland from closing this up. So our cycle is not necessarily a natural cycle. The bigger cycle is, but what we do is keep the garden going. So we trim and prune and remove seedlings and then plant what we want. Now on top of that, we do native plantings in very specific spots to support beneficial insect activity and all that. So we are in cycles. We have to keep our habitat replanting every year to keep that ecology going. So it's kind of a dance. But the bigger cycle is oak woodland completely taking over this entire area someday. Cycles are an interesting topic. I think Narciso had a much broader understanding of cycles and a huge appreciation. His 20-year cycles, that shows a depth of understanding that few can comprehend. The immediate cycles that I operate on here are very effective though. I'm in tune with the native plantings, the poppies, the lupin, the native flowers, and we depend on those to provide pollen and nectar for the exact insects that we need for this garden. So we have to follow the seasons here in California. That is the most critical thing if you're trying to establish an ecologically balanced garden, because those plants only grow and the seeds only sprout at a certain time. If you can get in tune with that cycle, that annual cycle, you can have success that is hard to imagine. But if you're out of tune with that, and most people are, if you look around, people are planting things in summer when it's hot. That's the opposite time. But money never stops. So the trick is to get in tune with our cycles, with this land, the way Narciso does with Belize on his 20-year cycle. We have annual cycles here that are critical, and we need to follow those cycles if we want to have success on the level that we hope for.
Would you say that global warming, climate change, is helping to spur more regenerative, sustainable methods?
Climate change is a big, big problem with a lot of tendrils out there. I think it is helping promote regenerative ag and our sustainable horticulture here, but it's such a big problem. I think what we can do locally is the most important thing. Some of us have just basically our local land to take care of. I think that the bigger problem, if we all continue to patchwork quilt all of our efforts together, I think it will spread out. That seems to be the best way, that grassroots spreading out, garden by garden, state by state. Success based on results, not based on just a loud voice, based on results. I've always fallen back on that. I am successful here because of results. They pay me and pay people to get results. So if you can get results using regenerative ag, sustainable horticulture, you're doing your job and you're helping with climate change. So I believe I can stand behind my work helping climate change because we got results. I think that results speak for themselves. If you look around, we have some pretty good results. 37.5 acres and fewer gardeners, and we've added 4 acres more of gardens. You can't do that unless you figure it out and crack the code.
So you see a certain amount of young kids come through here and are being educated. Do you think young people are more aware of global warming than older people, or any thoughts about that?
I think all the new generations that are coming through are much more aware of climate change and wanting to jump in and help. I've seen just an incredible enthusiasm. The problem is with social media and the information age, we see a bigger disparity between the amount of information one has and the actionable skills that one has. So I want to be right in the middle, giving them the skills they need. They've already got fantastic education from universities on ecological, sustainable systems, environmental restoration, that sort of thing, which is fabulous. And a lot of these kids know a lot more about that than I do. But my job is to teach them how to have the skills to apply these biological sciences, applied entomology, using insects to solve problems in the environment, applied microbiology, using microorganisms to clean up pollution, oil spills, things like that. These are cutting edge industries that are providing amazing jobs that are needed because we do have a lot of pollution out there. So yeah, the new generations are amazingly well educated. Huge amount of information rests on and responsibility rests on their shoulders. And I plan on being right on the forefront of giving them the skills they need to apply that, and then they can run with it. They say if you give someone a fish, you eat for a day. Do you teach that person how to fish? They eat for a lifetime.
That's cool. Let's see. Well, you're getting to the end of my questions, I think.
If we could broadcast this film to the university system, then I get better applicants too, because they can see the kind of guy I am and go, hey, I liked what he does. He's kind of trying to create balance with ecology and the environment. It sounds pretty groovy, And if they have any skills at all, I can run with it,
Well put. I'll probably put the whole interview online but I'll just use pieces of it for the documentary.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
But I'll send you a link when it's.
Oh, wow, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. Do you have any thoughts about food sovereignty?
Food sovereignty, meaning,
Right. Well, whether people have access to food. Back in the day, communities would grow food and all, but now with monoculture farming, you don't necessarily grow it yourself and don't have access.
I can talk about it because you and I both probably like health food and cooking and things like that. But my real model is ornamental horticulture, and there's a lot of relation to that too, regenerative ag. But when you start getting into the politics of food sovereignty, it gets a little, it's going to be personal.
Well, okay, so that's not necessarily your subject.
Not really. I mean, I can speak to it like you probably could a little bit too. The way you pose that question is actually pretty articulate. There's a certain expertise I have that I don't think anyone else has to this level. Maybe very few people in the country do. That's why they fly me out to Walmart, in Bentonville, Arkansas, where the headquarters is, because they built $1 billion museum there in the forest. Have you ever heard of Crystal Bridges? It's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see. It's like the Getty in the forest. And they wanted an organic, ecologically driven botanic garden around it. They realized they had this museum. They said, well, what about all this land? And all these owls buzzing around, all these birds. We better figure this out. And they were part of the American Public Garden Association. Some of those guys heard of me. So they flew me out there, and I trained the staff, and then I spoke at the national conference they hosted at the same time. So you can see how it's just, like you said, the word's getting out. But see, that was Alice Walton, the daughter of the original Walmart titan. So, sometimes it takes women, I think, to understand this more than men in a way. We have kind of that patriarchal society, and so most of my interns are women. I support women moving up in corporate America in all levels. And I give equal chance to both, but I've just had better luck with women being more sensitive to learning and getting out of their own way to the learning process. That's been my experience. I don't want to be too biased or judgmental or whatever, but I realize that I need an education in that, and so that's my way of learning, is to support causes that I'm learning about. Best way to learn is to kind of teach, right, or live by example.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say, and any particular subjects you'd like to stress again?
I think we covered it pretty good.
A lot.
Yeah, you seem to be pretty happy. You have enough material?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have good questions because it's the obvious. Well, what about that? What about, somebody you as a kind of an outsider in a way, make a perfect person to ask the questions because you haven't worked here 33 years. So I'm kind of so affected by it all. It's hard for me to be objective. I'm subjective because right now I'm looking at, that's the insect I want right there. That's the native metallic sweat bee. God, where's my lens? I need to get a shot of that to show the professors who taught me at Berkeley, who are coming here soon to document what I created here. Remember, this is a mirror image of their research facility. But they weren't, when they put in theirs, they hired a big architect, big contractor.
When you say theirs, you mean
The Davis Research Facility,
Yeah.
UC Davis, one of the most important agricultural schools in California. When they built their garden, there were challenges because they didn't understand ecological balance. They were trying to create a research garden. So it took them years to sort out the irrigation and the style of planting and they knew what to plant, but getting the right skilled people in there. I did it in 6 months, which took them 9 years because we're experts in an intimate love of this land. That's literally a love of the soil. My grandmother stood in that house 100 years ago when the Gavitz built it. She was friends with them. So I love this land, literally, the way Narciso loves his land. You have to literally consider it, not by ownership, but almost by, almost in a spiritual level. You're here for a reason. Recently, we had a summer tanager take up residence here. That's the only all-red bird you'll ever see around here. All red. Have you ever seen an all-red bird recently? You'll probably never see one in your lifetime. There's 6 that are reported in the whole Tri-Counties, but that's only reported by expert ornithologists. One of those 6 took up residence in that topiary garden for almost 4 months. Those aren't accidents. People say, oh, that's really interesting. Well, it's not just interesting. Those coincidences are not coincidences. They are created by this. 96% of all birds feed their young insects. So if you create an insectary garden, you've created an aviary. It's that simple. And if you're good at landscaping, these are half native plants. Those are the easiest to grow. The other half are plants I'm very familiar with and are easy. This is one of the easiest plants, this salvia, to grow. You can't stop it. I have to limit its growth actually by cutting back the edges. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what were you saying?
This peach is a great example of one of our young fruit trees. When you put the pollinators under the fruit trees, you're going to get a massive fruit load because every flower becomes a fruit. A lot of times fruit trees only bear, half the fruit they could because there's no flowers for miles. But if you look, everywhere you look, there's native California wildflowers, phacelias, poppies, lupin, and a few ornamental ones too for looks.
So these various plants here are...
Even the weeds provide pollen and nectar. Even the weeds. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And then when you knock this material down with equipment, it becomes food for the soil organisms. So these areas are carefully prepared, and the growth on trees is amazing.
Very nice. Are these California poppies?
These are opium poppies here.
Yeah,
This is a California Gilia capitata, globe Gilia. Isn't that pretty?
do anybody...
This is a plain old milkweed. This is the favorite food of the American goldfinch.
I don't see much of the fruit being nibbled on.
Imagine that. Pretty big fruit load too.
Yeah.
Fruit trees have a challenge too. Things do like to gophers get in there, but we became so good at limiting gophers, not using toxins, but we do have little traps, that we train pest control companies at this point. That's how good we are. I trained the largest pest control company we have here in the area. And they made over $100,000 the first season from my training. That means less poison in the environment, so I was happy to train them.
Oh, wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll even work with a chemical company if they'll stop using their chemicals to show them a better way of doing regenerative horticulture.
Are we in his way?
No, come on. He just wants to say hi. Okay. It's my guy. Hang on. Millionaires. This is our Larry Nimmer. He's doing the documentary.
Oh, hello. Hi. Nice to meet
This
you.
is our local genius supervisor, architect, everything. He does it all. He can do anything.
And your name is?
Junio Milanese.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Born and raised in Italy.
Oh, nice.
Italy.
Okay.
Yeah. What about you? Where are you from?
L.A.
Yeah,
Nothing
good.
too exotic.
It is.
He's in charge of all these employees that run. So we work together very seamlessly. It has to be very close connection. And remember the appreciation for ecology. Well, we appreciate our talents. And that's been our probably our best characteristic from the beginning when we first met.
Aw.
I knew this was the guy that would save us from, and he kind of knew I was the guy that would save us. So
Yes.
there's a genius. You bring out the genius in people. That's when you appreciate them. Just like you bring out the genius in the forest when you deeply appreciate it the way Narciso did. You're going to bring out the genius beyond what you can imagine. I don't know. He has genius way beyond what I can imagine. But you see it come out at the right time, in the right amount, in the right place.
Nice.
Wow. What I'm speechless. I get blank.
It's
Thank
true.
You, Corey. Let's don't leave.
No, no, no.
Don't leave.
No.
Don't leave. Don't leave. We need you.
Nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you as well. Okay. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
So what I was saying, this is another good example. See this little bit of disease. When I see this on a leaf, I don't get alarmed. Look at the new leaves coming out fresh. So disease is only a temporary thing. This is an ornamental plant, no way to, it's been hybridized by man to make a big fruit set. So it's lost some of its natural resilience to the environment, to pests and fungal diseases. But you notice how it's growing out of it. And look at the fruit set. Every flower has become a fruit. So the way we look at a plant, we don't accept disease. We see things as temporary. It will heal itself in good time. This too shall pass. Now I could use toxic chemicals to stop the disease. Would you want to do that in this situation when the fruit is so plentiful? You can't eat the fruit then, or it's not necessarily safe to.
Well, where does the fruit go to from Lotusland?
The fruit at Lotusland is so abundant. The gardeners eat as much as they can. The volunteers eat as much as they can. A whole bunch goes to the food bank. They eat as much as they can. And there's still quite a bit that lands on the ground, or we let some of the migratory birds eat. I actually tell the volunteers to keep fruit on the very top for the migratory birds to come through. We get unusual and rare species coming through here because we've created a sanctuary for these birds. So I am determined to always keep some fruit, especially on the persimmons. There's so many birds that just love persimmons. And I even appreciate crows and things. People, give some animals a bad rap over others. That's another one of these fallacies. All native California species deserve their place. We've tweaked the numbers so there's more crows than there used to be because of urban sprawl, but they still are a native bird. And actually crows, minor birds, and ravens are the smartest birds there are out there. There are studies showing incredible untying of knot abilities and stuff that only primates can do usually. So it's pretty incredible what we see in some of the bird populations. Our owls here are supported. We have screech owls, great horned owls, barn owls. I have barn owl boxes up. Those are all full of barn owls, which control rodents. But we also have great horned owls, and we've had 3 families go all the way to adulthood. Usually the fledglings don't all make it, but we've created so much food for them here within this organic, safe environment that we see all 3 fledglings grow up over months, stay with the parents until the summer when they eventually have to go the next year to make their own habitat, own territories. And that's something I'm extremely proud of, and I documented very carefully.
Nice. Well, thank you.
Now, one more tree I want to show you.
It kind of feels like the milka with the different types.
You like that? Yeah. I have 21 new trees. These are all new trees growing up. Yeah, that's a brand new tree. Brand new. I think it's only been in there, gosh, like 3 months or something. I mean, just a stick. Look, it's just shooting out branches. Now this tree is, let me just kind of go in here. I'll come back out, but I just want to, this thing's, look at that. Can you see the trunk on this thing? It's kind of pretty.
Oh, yeah. Some texture, yeah.
That's a pretty strong looking trunk. Look at it. Look how firm. I mean, like the rock. Can you see how firm that is? You can't budge this thing.
And what's the point you're making?
Yeah.
It's just a healthy tree?
Well, this is a plum tree.
Oh.
This orchard has a variety of stone fruits and other fruits, figs, persimmons, pomegranates. But we call it the deciduous orchard because most of these lose their leaves in the winter time. This tree is part of a new generation of trees. If you looked at it, someone would say, well, they might estimate the tree to be 9 or 10 years old. It's healthy, it's fully established. The soil was developed before the tree went in to be biologically alive. So there was a flower garden here right before. The next season I put the young tree in. This tree is only 4 years old. Look at the size. And the crop last year was massive. Buried in here is another small crop. It's kind of alternate years too on this one. So I'll have a big crop and low crop, so trees do that sometimes. But the model we've shown is you can develop through composting systems and biological systems in the soil 3 times the growth rate and to have no pests. That's something that Big Ag would want to look at. So I'm constantly trying to find the best model using our ecology to educate the public. So I'm not satisfied with just average results. I want to see something that shocks them. Because it's the only way to get through to people. You have to show using the information and resources we have. Everyone has the resources that I have. It's all locally sourced. They can do the same thing. And it's worth trying too. It's worth trying. It builds a lifestyle. It's built a career for me, but it'll build a lifestyle for them.
The different heights, I guess they create shade, and that makes the ground cooler, and the moisture is kept in the soil more.
Yeah, that's a great question. The different heights of a garden. Heights are a huge part that are often overlooked. Everything goes in on one year, so it's all the same height often. You want to stagger your planting, stagger your heights, and in that, you kind of embed diversity in the environment with shade and different age of your plantings. And so that way you always have pollen and nectar for insects, you always have habitat for birds, and everything doesn't reach maturity at the same time. So they say change is much more easy for us to accept if it's gradual. Really violent, sudden changes, big changes are very hard on the environment, they're hard on us. So I believe in education and slowly, gradually installing a garden as it becomes apparent to you what will grow there, what resources you have, what will fit in your budget. I often see people start off on a big project with high hopes, only to peter out because they don't have the resources or the information to do it in a very balanced way, in a very ecological way, and environmentally friendly way.
Interesting.
Our appetites are bigger than our eyes are bigger than our appetites sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's true with God, especially when you have resources. Eventually, I've actually come to the epiphany that resources, no matter how vast, are not the deciding factor on these grand estates or grand schemes of things. You can have all the resources in the world, but do you want 24 people at your house every day with blaring machines going? Or do you want to create something where there's nobody there some days and your beautiful estate is completely empty except for family, say, or just your home, maybe it's an apartment even. You don't want to max out based on your resources, because you can create an extremely unhealthy environment that's loud and polluting and noisy, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of. This is a 37-acre place maintained by 9 guys, and some gals too.
Wow. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I want to restate that one at some point, but that is huge. Resources are not, people may not understand that have the resources. That is not going to be, you can't just demand the world. You can try, and many have, but if you compare Lotusland to them, most people would choose Lotusland over their garden. The big Fortune 500 type people, the Bill Gates and the Larry Ellisons and all these folks, some of them have fabulous gardens. No one sees them. And when I look closely, when I'm invited to see these gardens, I see problems. I see personnel problems. I see company culture problems. I see plant problems. I see ecology problems. When I come here, our survey for company culture was 100% favorable. That doesn't happen. The surveyor said they've never seen that before. 100% of the employees said, I like working here. Partly that's due to Rebecca and her great leadership. And you don't see, then I'll speak to anyone that says, well, how are you doing on a disease or pest scale? Do you have the occurrence of a lot of disease and pests? We cured 99% of all disease and pests 15 years ago. So we've just enjoyed it for that long now. Probably even longer. I'm not even sure exactly when it got to that level.
Which way are we now?
We can go back through here.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah. I've had to establish some trails, kind of.
I'm hoping in a few months from now I could possibly interview you again.
Again, wow. Well, if it helps our cause, you know what I'm into. Trying to make a dent in influence, our local community, if this is seen more widely, that audience, that it's not just, you're not just copying Lotusland. You're trying to be successful in your own life. So my job as working at a nonprofit is to solve some problem in society. We're between government and private enterprise, right? We get tax benefits for being a nonprofit. So my job is to solve some problem in society. What is that problem? The use of pesticides. That's a big problem. I ought to know because I'm certified. I'm an expert in conventional and organic. So I know what that world's like. Chemical fertilizers, turns out that's the big one, not the pesticides. Chemical fertilizers are the biggest polluters and actually cause the disease. You wouldn't have insect infestations and soil diseases, really bad ones too, that conventional and organic face. You wouldn't have a lot of those if you didn't use petroleum-based chemical fertilizers. They're cheap, sure, they're cost-effective. Boy, do they cause problems. I proved it, and now we don't ever use those, ever. And that's when 90%, or about 75% of our problems across the boards were solved by stopping the use of water-soluble, highly available, cheap, chemically derived fertilizers.
From oil.
If you knew where they came from, you'd be shocked. They come from natural gas, which is a byproduct of oil. At super high pressures, like 2,000 pounds, and super high temperatures, they can siphon off the ammonia molecule. That's the basis of everything from ammunitions to cheap fertilizer, and it never stops. These plants are massive. They grind out so much product, so cheap, minute by minute. China's installing them all over the world because they want to dominate the agricultural system because they have a lot of people to feed. So their algorithm is world domination, and so is ours basically too. So we want to curtail that because it destroys the land. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's good. It's a quick fix, quick profits, quick crops to market, and what's left is barren land that erodes out into the ocean on a scale that's unconscionable. Satellite images off Madagascar show plumes of topsoil 4 miles out into the ocean. Just brown topsoil. The crevasses are 30 feet deep on that farmland. There are pipes suspended 30 feet in the air across these images that I've seen. It's incredible. So we have to do anything we can to curtail that kind of farming practice, because the people that in these lands, they don't understand that there's someone's just getting quick profits off of their land. Yeah. And they're going to be left living there with land that's unfarmable, and they're going to starve. Well, like they say in a lot of awareness classes, if you're ever wondering what to do and you're stressed in your life and you're thinking about going to a garden or whatnot, the easiest thing you can do is to come back to your senses, and that will reduce your stress right there. So come back to your breathing. Be aware of your breathing, breathe a little deeper. If you ever feel really stressed, your saving trick is to come back to you. Your breathing, your sight, your hearing, and if you can put yourself in a garden to do that, even if it's a small garden, it could be 3 pots on a patio, you will immediately feel better, and it works every time.